So we're going to start in with Ariel Cohen, who's the managing director of Energy Growth and Security at the International Tax and Investment Center here in Washington, D.C. He's long been an expert on the region, and we look forward to what Ariel has to say about, in general, the geopolitics of the region, sort of set the scene for us and for the other experts who will then chime in. So, Ariel, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hoagland. I want to commend the authors of the report, most capably led by Dr. Eric Rodenschild, with whom I always have a pleasure to cooperate, as I do with the Caspian Policy Center in general, and with Evgan and with the other staff. In addition to my work at the International Tax and Investment Center, I am also a senior fellow at the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council, and good to see Reed Blakemore here as well. I've been spending many decades on Central Asia, and quite a few years on rare earths. At ITIC, International Tax and Investment Center, we published a report on rare earths a bit earlier, focusing only on Central Asia. Now, I understand that Dr. Rodenschild timed President Trump's statement, yesterday, about the need for the US to grab $500 billion worth of Ukrainian rare earth. I don't know who told him that there are $500 billion worth of rare earth in Ukraine in the middle of the war. But it's timely. It's in the headlines. If you go today's New York Times and AP, you will see that we're talking now about receiving rare earth. Otherwise, America, as the president suggested, will feel stupid by not getting anything in exchange for the billions of dollars of assistance that was provided to Ukraine. I would not guess that Ukraine is in the center of the rare earth play, and it's important for our audience to distinguish between strategic minerals and rare earths. Strategic minerals are not necessarily rare. Titanium is a good example, which is produced in Ukraine and has been. Ukraine was in the center of the Soviet aerospace production for decades. The largest airframe on the planet, Antonov Mriya 223, Antonov 223 Mriya, was produced in Ukraine, a giant, I believe, 80-ton capacity air transport airplane. Aerospace rockets were produced in Ukraine. There are other rare earths in Ukraine that are available, including beryllium, a rare element that is necessary also in aerospace and in metals production. So strategic elements can be what is important for our military-industrial complex, aerospace complex, etc. Rare earth are lanthanoids. These are elements that are adjacent to radioactive elements or are radioactive. They're often mined together with uranium in the similar process or with non-ferrous metals. I will not bore you with metallurgy details. I will only say that if it takes 1, 2, or 3 processes to get, let's say, copper or zinc, it may take up to 24 separate melting processes to get rare earth, and that makes it more expensive. If we talk about millions of tons of ore deposits for iron or copper, we're talking for only tens of thousands of tons, which is orders of magnitude less for rare earths. So looking at the 3 regions in this report, excellent report, I would say Central Asia and especially Kazakhstan are the lead source of a whole bunch of rare earths, followed by Ukraine and then followed by North Caucasus, besides the manganese deposits in Georgia that go back to the 19th century. I think Comrade Stalin was robbing some of the manganese production in Georgia in the 19th century, believe it or not. Other deposits in Armenia, also in Georgia, to a lesser extent Azerbaijan, are in the Caucasus. And in Ukraine, because of the iron ore production, adjacent mining of, I mentioned already, titanium, beryllium, and other elements are also interesting. But what I would like to stress the most in this presentation is that we are in a whole new era of geopolitical competition, and I think Trump gets it. And before we go down really to the nitty-gritty, to the ground of mining and investment and regulation, let's understand that we are in the 21st century locked in a strategic competition with China. And China is the dominant producer and melter of rare earths. The two components here. One is production, geological exploration, investment in mining, getting it out of the ground. And the second pillar of that industrial complex is melting. You need a lot of cheap energy to melt, and you need to ship, and the shipment chain needs to be secure. So these are all complex challenges that people like the CPC crew, like ourselves, and International Tax and Investment Center, like my company, International Market Analysis, have been dealing with for decades for strategic clients around the world. And China deliberately dominated this sector since the 1990s. There were decisions by the Central Committee and Politburo in China allocating resources and deliberately running other producers off the market so that China will grab this jugular, this strategic jugular of industrial production, on which our aerospace, our high-tech, computers, chip production, alloys, electric vehicles, electric batteries, all depend. Be it graphite, be it uranium, be it titanium, be it the lanthanoids, that we all are dependent for our lives and our security with these metals. And today, close to 90% of mining, 70%, it went down a little bit, 70% of melting and processing are done in China and by China. And China does not shy away from using the rare earth as a strategic cudgel, as a weapon, just as we do with tariffs, as we do with chip machines that we don't want to export to China. China, in 2010, in a fishing dispute with Japan, canceled some of the exports of rare earths. And just this past December 2024, China stopped exports of technology for processing some of the rare earths, and specifically stopped exports of germanium and gallium that are necessary for semiconductors, antimony that is necessary in military industrial production, and I already mentioned refining technology, signaling that they are not hesitating to keep us on a leash with these technologies. Now, for the last, at least probably from Trump 1, for the last, 7, 8 years, we're talking about the necessity to rebuild American rare earth production. We have only one mine in California that is producing rare earths. There's some discoveries in Wyoming, in Arkansas, in Texas. However, it requires commitment of multi-year procurement contracts from the Pentagon and others. or building supply chains from friendly countries instead of homeshoring, friendshoring. Where can it be friendshored from? Canada, Mexico, some Latin American countries, Bolivia, which has a lot of Chinese capital already, is the Saudi Arabia of lithium. For example, lithium is needed for batteries, but Bolivia is no longer friendly for the United States. It has a far left government. Brazil has a lot of potential. Again, a question mark with Chinese presence and often anti-American rhetoric. In Sweden, there was a big discovery, but focusing on Ukraine, the Caucasus, and Central Asia, I would say the following. Very close to China and Russia. While we are at peacetime, they are not interfering to disrupt, but I'm sure they're watching very carefully. Two, when we are conducting C5+1 meetings once in a blue moon, the first one was President Biden and the Central Asian leaders. Before that, we never bothered to have a meeting on the presidential level. We never had a presidential visit to Central Asia. We put something like $4 million, correct me. I would ask our diplomats to correct here if I'm off with some numbers, but I believe it was $4 million to develop trade relations with Central Asia, whereas President Xi showed up with $4 billion the same year, 23 or 24. As Ambassador Hoagland mentioned, they did not talk very much about rare earth. They talked about human rights a lot. We won't mention any names of senior diplomats at the State Department who I never heard the words rare earth from their mouths, people in key positions. Russia will send Putin, or Putin will send himself to Central Asia at least once a year, if not 2 or 3 times a year. President Xi sometimes would show up in Kazakhstan as the first destination after renewal of his term. The leaders of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and other countries would go to Beijing and Moscow several times a year. The Wuhan meeting by Xi with a number of Central Asian presidents demonstrated the priority, and also he provided billions and billions of dollars worth of investment announcements in that meeting. So it's good to have the rhetoric. It's good that ourselves, CPC and others, are trying to put it on the map, but it's kind of like when I worked for a big think tank here in town for decades, and every couple of years wrote a piece about how we need to be involved in the Arctic, and said that we have only one diesel icebreaker and Russia has 20 nuclear icebreakers. And everybody said, yes, yes, yes. Had a hearing on the Hill, had a commission at the Pentagon, a 3-star Coast Guard Admiral. Is there such thing as 3-star Coast Guard? 2-star. Okay, Coast Guard Admiral will chair a task force. And then the Academy of Science will send the Healy to the Antarctica, the only working icebreaker, and we will be with 0 icebreakers. And this reminds me of the situation with rare earths right now. And the question is, are we too late? Because it takes years to invest in the supply chain, make the supply chain secure, and actually start making and shipping these metals. So my hope is that CPC is putting this issue on the line, and that we all will gather together and go brief Eric's successors at the National Security Council and say, guys, sort out what the best thing I liked in that report is the list of confusing and discombobulated regulations and pieces of legislation that you list. Okay, it's a disaster. We need streamlined line of authority with clear interagency if there is such thing as interagency. And to be utterly cynical, I don't want to be in the shoes of that ambassador or that CEO who goes into a smoke-filled room in Central Asia with a briefcase full of cash, knowing that he will not or she will not be prosecuted these days, as we found out yesterday, under Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and offer Minister of Mining the facilitation fee. I would recommend strongly against that. I want the record to show. But I think that move was a move against Beijing. And in the real world, President Trump inhabits, he thinks in those terms. I'll leave you with that. Thank you. So in terms of a Soviet data, as a son of a Soviet PhD geologist, I can tell you that while some of the data, as Spinney pointed out, was detailed and maybe even understating, these are 3 generations technology that is three generations old. If you talk about two-dimensional Karatage versus three-dimensional Karatage using modern geophysics, you have so much more that you can visualize today. You can use satellite technology that didn't exist in the 1960s and 70s. So we are 2 or 3 generations ahead of the Soviet data. Secondly, Ukraine, Caucasus, and Central Asia are underexplored still, as many other parts of the world. So when we're saying China got all this mining and refining going on, this is because companies were not in the position to explore, and then the contracts, long-term contracts that would justify the investment, they were not there. So it's up to the governments. Finally, a point of how we perceive or how people in the region perceive the Trump administration. One, I will direct our audiences to something called Destroyers for Bases deal in World War II. In 1940, the Brits wanted to buy 50 destroyers to fight the Nazis. And this is Roosevelt and Churchill, US and the United Kingdom, the British Empire, much closer than US and Ukraine or US and Central Asia. And President Roosevelt, our great leader, a progressive president, said, okay, we have this old World War I destroyers, we can lease them to you in exchange for 99-year naval bases in the Caribbean and Newfoundland. So these neo-mercantilist exchanges in security situations like the war in Ukraine are not unheard of. So let's put that in perspective as well. And finally, I am aware of countries getting on board early on, a country like Kazakhstan saying to the Trump administration, we're willing to cooperate on immigration and repatriation of illegal migrants with you, the Trump administration. We are willing to work with you on uranium and rare earths. So some of these countries understand the new nature of our administration, the new mindset, zeitgeist, and priorities, and are very much on board to do that. And honestly, today it's Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. The 3 other countries are still trying to figure out, who are they purging and why in Tajikistan, or how they're managing their gas economy in Turkmenistan and whatnot.
Zelensky controls 50% of the critical minerals in Ukraine. Specifically, would he and his government want from the United States to allow us to have greater trade with those of those minerals. What are the steps? I know it's sort of a specialized question, but given the news that hits us every day, I think it's relevant. So think about Ukraine and what should be done for this issue. And Ariel, you have your finger up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I will be less than pessimistic. I spent the last 12 years on and off looking at how Ukraine handled oil and gas investment. And every time there is a successful investment or an attempted investment, including by American companies or indigenous Ukrainian companies, a state corporation comes in and sort of puts its hairy hand on the investment, punishes the investors, etc. This needs to stop. It doesn't matter whether it's Zelensky or Poroshenko or Yulia Tymoshenko as a prime minister or whoever that was. The statist instincts of the Ukrainian state, the corrupt bureaucracy, etc., is there. And for a successful American and European investment to come in, you have to have the private sector, you have to have the state-run enabling environment that is transparent and non-corrupt. Unless this is addressed, we can have a conference like this every year, several of them. We can go to Kiev if Kiev is not bombed, have a conference there, been there, done that many times. And then you'll have Ukrainian investors coming out of the woodwork crying that they spent $300 million and they got nothing for that. So I hope the Trump administration finds the ways to communicate that to communicate that to the Zelensky administration, because the previous communications from the U.S. I'm a senior advisor to the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council for 30 years, and we have this is like a Groundhog Day. Again and again every year, we have the same conversation about the interference, corruption, and the lack of enabling investment environment. I think enough said.
We started with Ariel. Ariel, your final comment as we move forward quickly, please.
Well, first of all, I want to commend CPC for an excellent panel, high quality discussion, different perspectives. Second of all, this is not just about rare earths. This is about U.S. shifting the paradigm if we can. I'm not convinced we can. And I'm concerned, honestly, I'm concerned about some of the aspects of this policy shift that I see in terms of the creation of a permissive environment for potential corruption and whatnot. I was waiting for somebody to mention USAID, and of course, Eric, who served at the USAID, mentioned USAID. USAID was a key organization to enable economic development. There were issues. I evaluated USAID programs in several countries. Sometimes I was horrified how incompetent people who ran these programs, both on the home office and in the region, were local hires and whatnot. However, we need to focus on the development of these economic projects. And the paradigm shift, in my view, is about America's ability to do stuff and to win. We haven't won a war since Gulf War. We have not decisively won a war since Gulf War. We are in a Cold War with China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and we will need military, economic, strategic, industrial components to that competition, as we did in the Cold War in the 20th century. For that, we need, I see your hand, Ambassador. For that, we need a successful mechanism to ensure investment in rare earth, in competition with China, in the three regions we're discussing today and beyond: Latin America, Africa, North America, etc. Thank you.